Okay, we are on 90A, and we'll begin at the Mishnah near the top. So we're just cleaning up the last few things about when there's full wives to pay off with their ketubah. And the sequence of events, like if one of them was divorced before his death, after his death, etc. Okay, so Katan Shesio Aviv Subasa Kayamas. Shalinas Kain Kima. If an underage boy married off by his father, and then he matured, he got older, Subasa Kayamas. So whatever ksuba he wrote as a minor still remains valid. Even though obviously a minor can't really obligate himself to a debt, but we say almanas ken kiyama because by staying with the wife, he kind of affirms the ketubah. Gershon is gaira ishto ima. What about you have a married couple that are not Jewish and they both convert. So in general, we say that a person who converts to Judaism is like a newborn. In other words, whatever relationships he had before are not taken into consideration. But in this case, ksubas akayamas, if he had written her a ksuba, now, it seems a little strange because we're talking about, it's presumably a religious document, but I guess if you're living in a Jewish society and everybody obligates themselves to support their wife, so you might do the same. So if you wrote her ksuba when they were still not Jewish, it also remains in force. Shalanas Kain came up, for by staying with her and remaining married to her, he is in effect affirming, validating that ksuba. So Amar Huna says, we're talking about the basic obligation of the ksuba, right? The 100 for previously married woman, or 200 for one who was not. Also, Sefasane law, but we don't assume that any additional in the ksuba remains in these cases. Rabbi says no. The whole thing, whatever is written in the document. So they challenge Rabbi Yehuda Chichu Natalis Masha Chichu. Bryce, dealing with the same thing, said if the person, the minor who got older, or the convert added something new to the ketubah, so Natalis Masha Chichu, so obviously she gets to collect the full thing that is now in the ketubah. Chichu in, lo chichu lo. So this implies that that if they didn't add something, then she's not entitled to collect. So ema af masha chichu. So yeah, this is pretty obvious. It wasn't such a great question. It means even that she can collect even what was, in other words, the basic assumption is that she can collect the base amount, and she can collect even what was added. Volatile, but we have another brisa that is written differently. Chichu natalis masha chichu. If they added a new amount to the ksuba, then she can take what they didn't. Lo chichu v'sula gova masayim v'almanamana. If they didn't add anything new, then she's only entitled to the base amount. So from this brisa, it's clear that if they didn't add anything new, if they didn't renew the document by adding something new to it, then she's only entitled to the base amount and not to the original addition. So Tushat Rabbi Yehuda, yeah, that is indeed a contradiction or a proof against Rabbi Yehuda. Yehuda must say, and why did Rabbi Yehuda make that mistake? Because our Mishnah, the language of our Mishnah is a little misleading. Who savar ksuba say kayamas? He thought that our Mishnah means that her ksuba remains valid. Akula mil sakai, it's talking about the whole thing. Below he aikar ksuba kai. When our Mishnah says, again, this is pretty obvious. I don't know why Rabbi Yehuda missed this, but it seems kind of obvious that our Mishnah is talking about only the principal amount that she's still entitled to. Okay, next parak, we're dealing with a priority in paying the ksuba when there's not enough money in the estate of the husband who died to pay all the debts that he's incurred, whether it's ksuba or inheritance. One thing that we need to know is that, two things we need to know. Number one, that when you collect a ketubah from an estate, in other words, the husband passed away, and you collect a ketubah from the estate, you can't deplete all of the funds in the estate by claiming your ketubah. You have to leave over a little something for other creditors. Okay, and the amount you have to leave is 1 dinar, whatever that is. Okay, so there has to be something left, so that for the other, actually not for the other creditors, but for the inheritors of the estate. So for the children. So if the wife, ex-wife, or widow comes and collects her ketubah and depletes the entire estate, there's no inheritance left at all. So in order to make sure that the rules of inheritance are still adhered to, the rabbis required that you have to leave a little over so that there is some inheritance. The other thing to keep in mind is something called ksubas banin dichrin. So if a man has male children and passes away, then they can collect the ketubah on behalf of their mother. In other words, if the man dies and the wife died before she collected the ketubah, the male sons of that wife can collect the ketubah. Okay. All right, let's see what the Mishnah has to say. A person has 2 wives. And he dies. The first wife has priority in collecting her ketubah, and obviously this is a case where there isn't enough money to pay both of them, right? So the first one is entitled to collect first, and too bad for the second one, but there just isn't any money left. The yarshe harishan kadmin liyarshe shnia. If you have not a ketubah, but we're talking about the heirs of the first wife have priority over the heirs of the second wife. And this is because their mother was married first and her claim comes before the second wife, right? There was a pre-existing claim. By the time the second wife came around, the first wife already had a claim on the funds for her ketubah. So the second wife is second in line. What happens if he got married? Then the first wife dies, right? And then he dies. So then he marries a second wife, and then he marries a second wife, and then he dies, right? The second wife gets priority, right? She's collecting the ketubah. Obviously, the first wife predeceased the husband. There's no ketubah involved, right? But there still is but there's still an inheritance that her sons may be entitled to. But for the second wife, who was actually married to him at the time that he died, she gets to collect her ketubah first. Then her children get to claim the inheritance, and then the heirs of the second wife of the first wife. Okay. So the Gemara says, so first we're going to understand, what does it mean priority? So since the Mishnah says the first one has priority over the second one, obviously we're talking about a case where there aren't enough funds. So the Mishnah could have said the first wife gets and the second wife doesn't get. But no, it sounds like it's like a question of who comes first. So Michlal, what if the second wife came and she claimed she took what was due to her, right? Outside of the authorization of the court, but it was still due to her. So you have, like if I owe 2 people money and one of them comes and collects from me, even though I should have paid the other one first, maybe he's entitled to it or maybe not. So this is the same kind of thing. We're investigating if the second wife, who's second in line, comes and collects when out of turn, does she get to keep it or not? So the Gemara implies from the Mishnah by saying, yeah, the first one has the first right to do so, but it doesn't say that the second one has no right. Okay, so it implies that the second one has that right, and if she went ahead and collected, and she collected, lo mafkin you don't take it away from her. Shmamina, and this would imply that would the same would apply to a loan, as I said before. If I owe 2 people money, obviously the first one I lent to has the previous lien on my property. But if the second one came and collected before I did, maybe he gets to keep it. So Gemara says, no, maybe not. Maybe in the case of creditors, the same rule doesn't apply, and you really, we from the second later debtor and give it to the first. Umay kodemis. What does it mean that, like, why did the Mishnah use the word she has priority? Lagamri katane, it means that complete precedence, like we're reading the word in a way that it wasn't intended. Okay, by saying she has precedence, it means she's the only one. She is really entitled to collect her claim, regardless of the actions of the second one. Kidutan, and here's another example of using the word kodem, precedence. Main kodem lavas. In the case of an inheritance of an estate, a son takes precedence over the daughter in inheritance. So now in that case, we know for sure that if the daughter comes and collects and grabs her inheritance before the son comes along, then we say that she has to give it up. So precedence here means complete rights, not just who comes first. Excuse me. Others read this differently. Since the Mishnah doesn't spell out what happens if the second one comes and grabs the ketubah, it doesn't say that she has to give it back. It implies that she does have to give it back. Which would imply that in the case of debt, of owing money to two people, if the second guy comes and collects first, then we take it away from him and give it to the first one. Or rejects that. No, I'd say that he does. He does. If he comes and collects first, then he gets to keep it. I did. And why doesn't the Mishnah spell this out? I did the Tana Shnia B'Yarsha Kodim L'Yarsha Rishana. There's a parallel language here, since the second case of the in the Mishnah of the inheritors of the estate, the heirs, since it says the second wife or her heirs have priority over the heirs of the first wife. So in the second case, it's definitely a case of just who really should come first. In the first case, we're using the same language, even though we would actually step in and enforce that precedence. Okay, Nasa Sarishana. So the Mishnah says he married the first wife, and this is the second case. He married the wife, she dies, he married the second wife, and then he died. So Shmami not plus. There's three things we get from three principles we learn from here. Shmami not achas b'chai v'achas b'moso. Yesh lahem ksubas banim dichli. We see that whether the wife died during the husband's lifetime or after the husband's lifetime, the heirs of the first wife have that what I mentioned before, the ksubas banim dichli, that the sons have a right to the we don't worry that they're gonna, get into fights over this. So what this is getting at is that we're giving precedence, like the way you split up an estate is first the ketubah is collected, and then you give away the rest to the heirs, right? So by privileging these male sons of the first wife, they're like getting, they're getting first crack at the inheritance before things are split. They're getting to skim off the top. So we're affirming that we're not worrying about causing resentment within the family. And where do I get that from? The second wife and her heirs take precedence over the heirs of the wife. So we're talking. Our Mishnah is talking about precedence, right? But where there isn't enough money. If there is enough money, that implies that we don't change the rules. First, you distribute the Ketubas Vanim Dikrin, the Ketubah proceeds, and then you continue with the inheritance. Because the Mishnah is only talking about what happens if there's not enough money, we imply that if there is enough money, then we do distribute it this way. That first, the heirs of the first wife skim off the top, and then you divide the rest among all the heirs. Second thing, Shmami Naksuba Nasis Moso Chaverta. We see that a ksuba can become kind of the leftover of the second ksuba. In other words, if the ksuba of the first wife would deplete the whole estate, then they can still collect it, right? Whereas ordinarily we would say you have to leave over something for the inheritance. Here we don't say that. How do I know? Because the Mishnah didn't say if there is at least a dinar left over. So it's we're getting from that it doesn't have to be a dinar left over for this rule to be implemented. The takes precedence over the requirement to leave something over for the other heirs. And the third thing, that we do limit the tuba of the male children, can't be collected from property that's under lien. Because if you think otherwise, the sons of the first wife can come and collect their tuba from the sons of the second wife, because having this tuba obligation is like a lien, right? So if we're allowing the children of the first wife to take precedence, even though the children of the second wife have in effect a lien on that property, it's showing that any other kind of lien is also not effective to stand in the way of the ksubas manim. Maskil of Ravashi. So Ravashi asked about this. Where do you get this from? Maybe if you have two wives, one predeceased you and one died after you, maybe the heirs of the first wife don't have this special right to collect from the ketubah first. So what does the Mishnah need to say they have precedence? Well, it's only talking about the inheritance part of it, right? Not the ketubah obligation. What does the Mishnah have to tell me that for? I didn't tell the because it's already involved in this case of multiple heirs from the different wives. It's just including. And the second thing that we deduce that the ketubah becomes the surplus for its second ketubah. Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe the Mishnah is only talking about where there is already some left over. It's not talking about a case where collecting the first ketubah would deplete the whole estate. So it's not. You can't necessarily make that implication that the ksubas manim dikrin doesn't have to leave over a dinar. Unresolved. Ravashi, some would make these deductions, and Ravashi does not. So actually, we're now going to see a dispute among Tanaim about the case where one wife dies while he's still alive, and the second wife dies after he dies, and what the Mishnah rules about that. The Tanya. So this case. Benana says Yicholim b'nei Rishon along with b'nei Ashniya b'nei Balas Chovatim. The children of the first wife can say to the children of the second wife, basically, you're like debtors, right? You have a claim against the estate, but it doesn't so take the tuba of your mother. And that's it. Then you're done. You don't get to share in the inheritance. Well, no. not that they get to share, but like you take your ketubah first, and then we'll take our ketubah, our mother's ketubah, right? So whereas the other, so what we've been assuming in the Mishnah is the second wife or her children take their ketubah, and then everything else is split equally. Everything left over is split equally among the heirs. But no, maybe maybe the next thing in line is the full ketubah of the first wife who died, who predeceased the husband, and then if there's anything left, then they split that equally. But Rabbi Akiva Omer for Kafsa Nachla Milifnei Bnei Arishona, V'Nafal Lifnei Bnei Ashniya. The Rabbi Akiva says no. If the husband, when the husband dies, the ketubah of the second wife takes precedence. One second. Yes, Rabbi Akiva has a what seems a bit of a strange thing that like Rabbi Akiva says there is no more precedent obligation of the ketubah of either of them. Like once the ketubah obligation leaves the children of the first wife, then it becomes as weak as any other claim. So all of the proceeds of the estate would be split equally. And why my love of maybe this is what they are arguing about. The Marsavar, the first opinion in our Mishnah, that in this case then there is still this precedence of collecting the ketubah that goes to the children of the second wife. And the second opinion in our Mishnah holds like Rabbi Akiva, that if there's once this ksubas manidikrin is taken away from the children of the first wife, then it doesn't exist anymore. Rabba said, Ashkechinu Rabbanan Devei Rav, the Yasvei Kam, right? I found the rabbis in the yeshiva of Rav. They were sitting and talking about this. And the Chui Alma Ahas B'Chaviach Devosi Yeshlan Ksubas Manidikrin. No, we don't like Rabbi Akiva's opinion. There's still this obligation of the Ksubas Manidikrin that they get to collect first before the rest of the inheritance. Here, what they're talking about is if the Ksubah becomes like the surplus, like leaving over some is considered leaving over that surplus that you have to leave of at least a dinar, and then apply as well to a debtor rather than a ksuba collector. So Mark Sabar ksuba nasis mosa havarta. The first ton of our Mishnah says that the ksuba becomes the surplus for the second ksuba, and the same applies for a leftover dinar. Also counts as a surplus. Rabbi Akiva says that the ksuba does not become the surplus for the second ksuba, and the same applies to a creditor. And then Rabba, who's telling the story, says, I told them, no, when it comes to a creditor, everybody agrees that it counts as a surplus. Keep leaving ksuba. They're only arguing about the ksuba. So Masketh Rabbi Yosef says, Rabbi Kiva, Nachla, Im Yesh Moser Dinar. Like, why does Rabbi Akiva state categorically that there's no more rule of ksubas manidikrin, that they don't have any special claim anymore? He should have said if there is, anything left over afterwards, right? If that's what he holds. Rabbi Yosef says, we're talking about when one wife dies while he's still alive and the other after he dies. Okay, so that's as we have seen all along, that's how we're interpreting our Mishnah. Ane Tanai. Okay, I think this is actually a good place to stop. What's going
Okay.
on tomorrow? We're meeting after the class.
Yeah. Thank you, Doug.
Okay. All right. I wish you Marcy Matova and easy fast, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Actually, I don't think I'm going to be doing. I'm not sure what we're going to end up with that.
Okay, whenever. Be well. That's the important thing.
You too.